The DDJ-REV5 from Pioneer DJ is an extremely well-featured DJ controller for Serato DJ mainly. Also works with Rekordbox, which is an advantage over the REV7 that came before it. Big changes, it's got CDJ-style jog wheels and not motorized platters. Round the back, there's no inputs for your decks or for your record, or for your CDJs. It's just a software controller with one auxiliary input. That said, you do get all the inputs and outputs that you'd expect, microphones and balanced and so on. Dual USBs. It's also USB powered now, which is pretty cool. But by and large, we're looking at a slightly cheaper and reduced feature set as far as the inputs and outputs and so on go, version of the REV7. That said, it is not inferior, not by any means, because it's got features which are completely unheard of until now. And so we're going to spend most of this review going into a lot of detail on the auto BPM transition and the piano play being the two big new things here. You're probably not going to see a more in-depth look at these things. So if that's what you want to understand, then this is the right review for you. That said, we will also be looking at the way the effects are implemented, because this is different on the REV7. We'll be looking at the extra decks and the dual deck capability, because the REV7 is just a 2-deck controller and this one can control 4 decks with this neat extra feature. And of course, stems. You would be unsurprised to hear that the stems implementation on this is really in-depth, and stems didn't exist at all when the REV7 was made, and so there's no dedicated stems controls at all on that controller. If you want a more general look at the feature set, I recommend looking at our REV7 review, because that is the same unit as this, minus the motorized jog wheels and plus the inputs for your decks or CDJs around the back. This is going to be a real in-depth dive into auto BPM transition and the piano mode. And then I will give you our thoughts as to who this is for at the very end. So are you ready to learn about the new features? Let's take a look. Auto BPM transition is a way of automating the big BPM changes that you'll typically want to do in an open format set, and of keeping everything on the beat. It's a cool little feature. So this is how it works. You've got the controls at the top of each deck. You've got one set for each of your decks, so that you can do it from this one to this one or that one to that one. So you've got this select button here. By holding down the shift button and pressing the select button, you can change the number of bars that it's going to spend moving from the BPM of the deck that you set it on to the BPM of the other deck. So I'll set it to 4 bars. So what we do now will take 4 bars to happen. By the end of 4 bars, the transition will be complete. Also, by holding down the select button, you can choose auto loop, stems, and key lock. And when I press it, you'll see that they flash. Key lock flashes, auto loop flashes, and stems flash. I'll show you how that works in a minute. For now, we're just going to leave it set exactly how it is. I'm going to turn the sync button on. I'll explain to you why I'm using sync, because there's 2 different ways of this working, with and without sync. And as you can see, again, from the top of the screen, we've got one deck at 118 BPM and one deck at 95 BPM. Let's transition now between the 2 of them using auto BPM transition. As soon as I press this button, it will start moving the tempo of this deck to the tempo of this deck. And you'll see that the tempo of this deck temporarily moves up to where this one is, so that they're both always in time. So I can press play on this one at the same time as pressing this button if I want, and it's going to sound good. So did you notice that? Here at the top of the screen, both tempos are now exactly the same, but throughout that transition, they were the same as well. So when this one was at its original 118, this was at 118. When this had gone down to 110, this was at 110, and so on. It was doing a straight, clean BPM change between the 2 of them simultaneously without me having to touch anything on here, which freed me up to mix them in and out or whatever I wanted to do. Now, this deck here went to the tempo of the track on this deck's original tempo, 95 BPM. And the reason it did that is that I had the sync button pressed. Because if you think about it, whatever I set the tempo on a track that's going to be mixed in, Doesn't matter, because sync is always going to take charge. In other words, whatever's playing at the time is what this syncs to. So there's no information as to where I want this track to be, because sync button is turning off anything going on here. So it chooses to always mix it to the original tempo. However, it's keeping the transition in sync for me anyway. So I don't need the sync button at all for this to stay nicely in sync, certainly as far as the tempo goes. So if sync is turned off, I can choose the tempo I want this track to play at. So for instance, let's say I wanted this one to play all the way up at 102 BPM, right? So let's reset the tempo on this one back to where it should be, 118. So this is now at 118, this is now at 102, because that's the tempo I want. Sync is turned off. And if I do the same thing again now, then you'll see that it's only going to move it down to 102 and not to 95. Let's do that. Again, I'll start this one and the track at the same time. See, it's moving down, it's getting to the end of the 4 bars now. And it stopped at 102 because that's where this one was set, and that's because I didn't have the sync button pressed. So you've got 2 choices there for how that works. It simply hasn't been possible in the past to beat mix 2 tracks from one BPM to another without the sync button pressed. Just, it's not possible, you can't do it. Well, maybe you could if you're Jazzy Jeff, but most of us can't do it. So that's a way of doing that to start with. But there's a lot more going on here, because if you remember, I was talking to you about how we've got select and we've also got auto loop, stems and key lock that we can affect at the same time, and this is a little bit of automation. So let me show you how this works. This allows us to say, okay, when I press this play button here, I want you to kick in an auto loop of whatever I set, or kick in the stems to what I set. So for instance, in this instance, because this track here on this deck, let's just reset the speeds of these as well back to where they were. So for instance, because the track on this deck starts with drums and a bit of bass, where I'm doing the transition, I might want this to start slowing down, but also to take the bass and drums out of this track. And because I've got stems here, and because I've got this new feature, I can. So when I press this button here, it will turn off the bass and drums, leaving just the vocal and the melody. There's no vocal there really, so it's just going to be the melody. And so I'll have the melody going from this track, while the drums and bass are kicking in from this track, giving me a smoother transition without me having to just remember to turn everything off there, because I can do it a little bit ahead of time. So let's do the same transition this time. I'm going to start on this track from that place where we're starting from. This one I'll start from the bit near the beginning with that bass and drums, and let's do it this time by telling it in advance that we want to turn off the bass and drums on this track. So keep an eye on what I do here. I'm going to hold down, and I'll do it all while it's playing to show you how easy it is. I'm going to hold down the select button and I'm going to tap bass and drums just to turn them off and leave these on. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do while we're actually in the mix, so watch away. Now, another thing I can do is I can say, all right, I'm running out of room on the new track. It's about to run out, but I want to do a nice long transition. So what we would normally do then, of course, would be to trigger a loop and then start moving the BPMs and then start worrying about the other track. Again, we can automate all of that ahead of time. By pressing the select button and pressing auto loop and then choosing the loop up and down buttons, I can choose a length of loop that when I press play, it will automatically start a loop of that length and just continue to slow the track down. So for instance, I could I'll set a really obvious loop this time. I'll set let's say we'll set a 2-beat loop or something. Watch on the screen as I do it, and then when I trigger this, you'll see that that loop auto triggers as well. It's going to set the pitch back to where it should be on both decks there. So we're going to do exactly the same thing. Watch the select as I do this. Let's set the same bass and drums off. Auto loop, 2-beat loop set on the screen. I could also use the key lock function by turning this off. So if I'm doing a big key shift, if I'm moving from a big BPM to a low BPM and there's a constant tone or something, and I don't want it to hold the key there, I want it for effects to slow the key down or speed the key up or the pitch as it moves the BPM up and down, I can turn that off there by doing that as well. One thing I've noticed about this, and I'm not sure whether it's because we've got a very early version of the software and it will be changed, but you sometimes end up with a situation where when you've got the pitch control in the middle, the pitch hasn't returned to 0 on the track, and normally turning sync off will do that and immediately go back to 0. For some reason it doesn't, so that's why you see me pressing shift and just tapping this to reset the pitch. As I say, I don't know if that's a feature or whether that's something that's going to be changed, but it's easy enough to set the pitch back to 0 by going like that. So if you're playing with this feature and you don't know why, when your sync's off and your pitch control's in the middle, your track isn't at 0%, that is what you should do to reset it. So pitch play is a feature that's on most Serato gear, but piano play is brand new to the REV5. And piano play lets you take a particular cue point that normally would be set to, say, a voice or a synthesizer, but set to one note that you like, and spread it across all of these buttons here as if they were keys of a piano. And it's using the fact that the pads are all together as opposed to being separated to say, okay, we've got all these here, let's treat this like a little synthesizer keyboard, which makes it rather clever. So this is the usual pitch play function. Usually pitch play is on one of the hold down shift and press one of these to get these ones written underneath, and it's this one here. So holding down shift and pressing that will switch on pitch play mode. The first thing you should do in pitch play is choose a cue point that you want to be the one that you're going to play across your buttons. So I'm going to hold down shift again, my cue points are lit up here, I can choose the one I want. I'm going to go for that one there. And so now that cue point that I selected there for my hot cues is going to play. And that's the one that I chose, right? So it's the cue point that was set at that part in the track. But in this mode, all these buttons here will give me different up or down pitches. So these ones are moving up to there, and these are moving above it. I've got 4 notes below and 3 above. I can use the parameter button to move this one around. So this one is now there. And now I've got loads of notes below. Or I could go in the other direction. Now I've got loads of notes above because my original note is right down here, bottom left. And the idea is you write riffs, or whatever you want to write using the buttons in pitch play mode. So that's pitch play. Piano play though, as I say, takes it a lot further. Shift piano play. We're now in piano play mode. So again, I can hold down shift and choose the pad I want to use. I'm going to go back to the same one there. This is the hot cue that's set to there that I'm using. So now I've got that original hot cue there, just like we had before. But notice how these are now laid out like a piano. The blues are actually the black keys of a piano, and the whites are the white keys, and this is my original note. So all the notes are going to be above here. So I've got a whole major scale going up. Whole octave of notes going on there. And I've also got the black keys in between them. So now it's easy to write riffs using real musical notes, and of course if you're musical you're going to find that's going to be a lot more fun than trying to do it using the 8 keys and having to use the parameter mover to move around all the time. So if I had a loop playing over here, for instance, I can play a little riff there. Now it gets kind of better than that because I've also got the ability to move the starting note around. So I can move the starting note to somewhere in the middle. So now I've got that first note there. And now I've got lower notes. And I could move it so it is up the top. So that's now my highest note, and I can go all the way down to here. And so on. And I've got also the parameter button up here that gives me minor pentatonic and major pentatonic. And if you're musical, you'll know what that means. Basically, I've got some different scales I can play with to get a different effect. And sticking to the white keys will give you that scale in a way that will give you potentially nice little musical riffs that you can play over the top of something without knowing an awful lot about music. So this is really nice. And I do like the way that this has been thought about with these together. Someone said, well, hang on, because these are all together, let's treat it like a little synthesizer. That's cool. So the way the effects work is simple, pretty powerful. No hardware effects on here like the REV7 because it hasn't got any way of plugging anything else through the mixer, of course. But the effects here are all in Serato and they're pretty cool. But you do need to have the screen on really with the effects window open to understand them and to use them to the best potential. Otherwise, you're kind of running blind. So we have effects 1, 2, and 3 here. 4, 5, and 6 here. And these are best used with the Serato effects screen that you can see here set to the multi-effects mode, where you've got one of these for each of the effects buttons on the controller. So currently I've got the effects set to effects bank A, which you can see my mouse pointer pointed to in the middle there. You can switch that over by holding down Shift and pressing bank A and bank B down here. So press that, I go to the second bank. You can see those changing on the screen and you can see all the effects that I've got changing there. So I can have 12 effects ready to play here. Let's just set something playing. I've got some music playing there. So to choose an effect, I press the button here. So that effect is now set to effect number 1, but it's not on yet because I haven't pressed the paddle. Because I'm playing on the left-hand deck, I'm going to press the paddle on the left-hand deck to turn it on. Post-fader effects, of course. To lock it on, you press it up, and to momentarily put it on, you press it down. That's how these paddles work. The main control you've got over these is this one here, beat, and this decides, you can see changing on the screen now, the number of beats or the fraction of a beat that this effect works over. So for instance, this is currently a delay and this is going to be a half beat delay now. Or I could have a much longer delay by pressing that to say 2 beats. Now another way that you can affect what's going on here is by using the level depth. So this is the amount of the effect. That's off and that's all that you can have. So let's switch to another effect here. We've got the reverb here. So this is very, very little reverb. And this is a lot of reverb. And somewhere in the middle. And in this instance, using this will give us a longer reverb. Now I've got these set to the kind of standard Serato effects for these ones here, moving across. So just got flanges and stuff over here. And a filter there. And then I've got some more esoteric ones set when I press Shift and go onto here. Which could be a way that you want to set your effects as well. Of course, if you want more control over the effects than just the level and the beat, you want to, for instance, select something where you can change the length of the tail or the reverb and all that stuff, you can set the effects on the screen to different values. You can, for instance, have them both set so they're only triggering one, and then you've got different ways of controlling from here. But I strongly advise you to leave it on these multi settings because it just works best with the controller. And of course, you've got the choice on the screen of changing the effect entirely. So you can have a whole new set of effects chosen from all the ones available to you in whichever version of Serato you have, and then you can click save them to a new bank, and then those banks are available to you on the hardware when you press Shift and go to bank A and B. I think they've got the flexibility and the immediacy just about right with the effects there. And remember, of course, you've also got your filters. So filter plus all the effects, pretty good. Now talking about immediacy, this area here is unique to the REV7 and the REV5, and it gives you a lot more control. Now this is majoring on stems, which we'll look at in a second, but first I want to look at what these buttons do here, because these buttons here give you 4 pad modes, and the first 4 pads in each of the pad modes you can control here. Now 3 of the modes, Hot Cue, Scratch Bank and Sampler, also exist on here. But the point is that these give you independent control, so you can be doing something else down here while having the first 4 pads of your choice going up here. So for instance, I could set hot cue up here, and I could set roll down here, and now my hot cues are going here. But I've also got roll on here, 2 sets of pads going at once. I can also choose save loops up here, scratch bank, sampler I can choose up here as well. Hold down shift and press it to get the other one. I'm triggering my samples up here now while I've got the roll going on down here. Now another thing I can do, so this is 2 pad modes going at once, is hold down 2 pad buttons here. So I could hold a hot cue there and then tap roll. And now I get the hot cues, the first 4 hot cues at the top, and my roll functions at the bottom. And I've got the scratch bank or the sampler or whatever else I've got selected going on up here. So up to 4 pads in up to 3 modes all going at once, unique to the REV5 and the REV7. So unique to the REV5 is this button here, controlling our stems. So again, we've got a stems mode here. By pressing shift and pressing this button here, I'm in stems mode. And I've got the stems effects going on. Same way stems mode works in any Serato controller, but because I've got this extra button here, I've got more flexibility. Again, I don't have to have stems set here. I can have other things going on down here, hot cues, rolls, both, hot cues, save loops, whatever I've got set going on down here. Tap this and I'm into stems up here. The lights turn with the stems I've got. Now currently it's set to the mode where when you press one, it takes it out of the mix. But if I double tap it, now it'll solo the thing I touch. So you get that choice there of double tapping it or single tapping it to get to there, or using it in one of these other modes. Another cool stems feature is that our EQs here can be switched out to work as our stems controls for drums, bass and melody combined, and vocals. So the buttons down here do that. By holding down shift and pressing one of these, so I'm going to press channel 1 because we're using the left hand channel here. Now, that's doing my drums. Bass and melody. Vocals. So if you want more control over your stems than just turning them on and off using the pads or using the buttons, then that's there. You know, a lot of these features have appeared on other decks, other controllers before. Maybe the REV7, maybe the Rane 4. In the case of some of the stems features, for instance, you can separate the track instantly to another deck and then have, for instance, the vocals playing on one deck and everything else playing on the other, very simply on this unit, to have 2 versions of the track, like instant doubles with stems, right? And so this is all cool, but not brand new. One thing that is pretty unique here, it's not totally new, but it is pretty unique, is the way it works with 4 decks, because that wasn't on the REV7 at all. Let's have a little look at that then. And so what we've got here is what's called dual deck mode. So usually on controllers with 4 decks, you get a button here that switches between the decks so that we've got all 4 decks working together. You can see at the very top of the screen there, as I press this button, it's switching from deck 1 to deck 2, and I press the one on the other side, deck 1 to deck 2 on that side. So it's actually numbered 1 and 3 and 2 and 4, right? So that gives me control over that other deck. I can now load something onto the other deck and control it from here. I'll press the button again and I'm controlling the top deck, right? So that's the way that works. It's a little bit fiddly because you've only got 2 mixer channels, of course, but it's there. And then when you switch to the new deck, your controls will take over from there using something called soft takeover. So you need to move the control back to where it was when you were last on that deck for them to become active. That's the way that works. That's been on most DJ gear for a long time. But what's useful or interesting about this is you've got dual deck mode. So you can set this up when you press shift and press this button here. here, then it's flashing. Now watch. See, both decks are being controlled at once there. Now the levels and the EQs and the stems and everything for those decks will be as you set them individually. So if I press shift and that button again, it turns it off. So I'm now on deck 2 and deck 4. I can set the volumes and everything how I want it. I can use the sync button, do whatever I want. But as soon as I go like that, they'll be locked together exactly as they are. And then I'm controlling them both at once. So this is really useful if you want to treat 2 tracks as 1 track for a routine, because ultimately you're controlling 2 completely different tracks together, which is pretty smart. Look, we could go on forever about the features on this. I've covered the big new ones and I've covered some of the main ones that are at least reasonably unusual to find on a controller like this. But this has got everything you would expect to find on it for a high-end Serato DJ controller. This is for you if you're an open format DJ who wants to really push the boundaries of what you can do. In a lot of ways, this is unsurpassed for that. We've looked at most of them in this video. The idea of having all 12 Serato pad functions, including 2 user-defined ones on there, is awesome. The splitting out of pad functions, so you've got them on your own buttons so that you can have freed up pads down here for other things, is great. We've covered all of this. I think the things that maybe are against this are you might just not get used to having the pitch up here, but with the CDJ jog wheel. Didn't bother me, you might not get used to it. This is stingy. Come on, we should have had the inputs for external things around the back here at this kind of price level. And so the Rane 4 beats this if the external inputs with static jog wheels is important to you on a Serato controller. But if what's important to you is having lots of stuff which is unique and having ways that if you give yourself the muscle memory to learn them will give you exciting new ways to play, then this over the REV5 is the right choice. You're saving money, and if you don't need those motorized platters, hey, you know, you're just spending on something you're not going to really even probably get on with, because motorized platters aren't for everyone. Rane 7, scratch DJs, turntablists, people who want to do that area of performance DJing. Rane 5, open format DJs, people who want to really push the boundaries of what you can do with Serato, especially with stems. Pretty much equal stems functions on the Rane 4, which is the biggest competitor for this, I would say, but the Rane 4 gives you the advantage of actually having the external inputs, which you don't get on this. So there's a decision to make there. They're both, Rane 4, REV5, and indeed the REV7, they're all very, very good Serato DJ controllers, and hopefully we've helped you to kind of pick apart which one might be for you. We've actually got a comparison video of this and the Rane 7, so do take a look at that if you're undecided between these two, and we've got reviews of both the REV7 and the Rane 4 as the other 2 closest ones to this out there as well. We really like it. I think this is going to do well. I think it's going to appeal to DJs who want these kind of features, and there are actually not that many Serato controllers between beginner and this kind of level, and so this is something that you're not spending as much as its bigger brother, for instance, and you're getting pretty much all the functionality, at least as far as the software goes. It's been a long one. Thank you for sticking with us. We've also got the written review, which is linked underneath. If you've got any questions about this, any feedback, anything we haven't covered you'd like us to look at, please do ask. You can do so underneath. And we've deliberately not even gone near Rekordbox because this would be an hour long if we did. I think most people will be using this with Serato. But if you've got questions about that, again, ask them underneath. Meanwhile, this has been Phil in the Digital DJ Tips studio with our review and our in-depth look at the must-see features of the DDJ-REV5. Till next time, get good, get out there, make the moments. We'll see you very soon.